and opens up the opportunity for Thorpe Park to face legal consequences. We've just had some terrible breaking news, and no, it's not the fact that Oktoberfest starts today. Following the news last week that Natural England have withdrawn their objection to Project Exodus, we've just had some news in from the Environmental Agency, which is pretty bad to say the least, and opens up the opportunity for Thorpe Park to face legal consequences.
Following the submission of Thorpe Park's new roller coaster planning application, the Environmental Agency came back with 3 objections. The primary objection, Objection 1, relates to the fact that the roller coaster is set to be built within a flood zone. Objection 2 relates to inadequacies in the flooding risk assessment, and Objection 3 relates to the impact on conservation.
Now, the initial planning application was submitted back in March of this year, and following all the objections, Thorpe Park then went on to submit a revived application back in June. You'll be pleased to know that following the amendments made within the June application, the Environmental Agency have now withdrawn Objection 3. However, both Objection 1 and Objection 2 surrounding flooding still stand, so we've got a long way to go yet, folks. And it's safe to say that the road to getting this approved is probably going to be even rougher than infusion.
The reason Objection 2 still stands is because Thorpe Park have provided insufficient details within some areas of their flooding risk assessment. Such areas include how people will be kept safe in the event of flooding and the mitigation measures that will be put in place to prevent any flooding from occurring in the first place. However, it seems that this objection won't be too hard to overcome, as this suggests that all Thorpe Park really need to do is just provide the Environmental Agency with a little more information on the areas highlighted.
The real issue, however, surrounds the primary objection, Objection 1, as what the Environmental Agency are essentially saying here is that they're not happy with the location of the roller coaster because it sits in an area that suffers from too high a risk of flooding. But there's essentially a system that's used that is a measure of how likely an area is to occur and how severe the flooding would be if it was to happen. And areas are categorised essentially into flood zones, with the higher the number being the greater the risk of flooding. Essentially, parts of the roller coaster sit within flood zone 3, which means that there's a high risk of flooding, and this is what the Environmental Agency have a problem with. However, as I mentioned in my last video, a YouTuber, Jack Silkstone, who I'm sure you all know and love, did a more detailed assessment of this, and it turns out that Thorpe Park as a whole sits either within flood zone 3 or flood zone 2, meaning that the entire park essentially has a moderate to high risk of flooding. This means that all of Thorpe Park's existing roller coasters, along with anywhere where they could build a new roller coaster, pretty much has an equal risk of flooding, so there's not much that Thorpe Park could do about this really. The only ways that they could essentially overcome this objection is either to scale down the roller coaster, which I'm sure they don't want to do because they're aiming for the tallest roller coaster in the country, or move it to a different location, which I'm pretty sure they're going to be quite reluctant to do either. Like, I'm sure they've chosen Old Town for a reason.
Some of you who watched the last video may remember that I said that even if there's an objection in place, the council are still able to technically approve the roller coaster. However, and this is the worst news of all, the Environmental Agency have essentially put a legal condition in place that prevents Thorpe Park from doing that.
What the Environmental Agency have essentially said is if the council are to approve the application despite the objection, then they're going to have to get in touch with them for further discussion. And they're also going to have to refer the application to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government for their determination. And failure to do this could mean that the park may face legal challenges. Honestly, at this point, I just wish Thorpe Park all the best with getting this through. I hope that if it does get rejected, they can appeal it somehow. Honestly, I'm lost at this point. I don't know how this stuff works. Do I think that this roller coaster is going to get built now? Honestly, I'm not sure. Last week I was 70-80% certain that it would, but we were all naive to what the Environmental Agency were going to put in place at that point. And now it's honestly pretty 50-50. You've got to think that Thorpe Park is a massive tourist attraction that brings in so much money for that local area, and visitor numbers have been on a decline for the last decades, and we assume that's due to a lack of investment. So from a financial perspective, there's no reason not to approve it. I can't see this opening in 2024 now, as I feel this is all just going to cause significant delays. Legoland announced a new roller coaster the other day, so maybe Merlin could push that forward to 2024 if the road to getting that approved doesn't prove to be quite as rocky, with Exodus being the new 2025 edition for the UK. There's also Blackpool Pleasure Beach to consider, which I'm sure will get a new roller coaster at some point. Go on, click the video on the right side of your screen to see my possible concept for a new ride on the current site of Bowlerdrome. As for Thorpe Park, I guess you all have this to look forward to.